In an underground arena beneath a forgotten Budapest textile factory, a brash ex-commando was about to test his ego against a living legend. What began as a blood-soaked spectacle for gamblers and oligarchs turned deadly serious when Eliev the Hammer Cohen mocked Chuck Norris as just Hollywood. Eliev Cohen wasn't your typical underground fighter. For years, he was an Israeli Defense Forces commando, a soldier turned cage warrior, undefeated in 16 brutal bouts, known for ending fights with surgical violence. When the ex-commando challenged Chuck Norris in front of a roaring crowd, he had no idea he was walking into something far beyond a publicity stunt. Norris's silent response and devastating efficiency would ignite a chain of humiliation that no battlefield ever had. What began as an ego-fueled taunt would become a lesson in martial philosophy. The arena that night would never be the same after a confrontation that blurred the line between spectacle and transcendence. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The underground arena pulsed with raw energy. Tucked beneath an abandoned textile factory on the outskirts of Budapest, its entrance unmarked save for a small red door guarded by men with impassive faces and discerning eyes. Inside, the converted warehouse had been transformed into a temple of combat. Its center dominated by an octagonal cage, bathed in stark white light, surrounded by tiered seating that disappeared into shadows. Tonight, every seat was filled. Wealthy businessmen in tailored suits sat alongside tattooed fighters. Instagram influencers mingled with Eastern European crime figures. They came for different reasons, some for the gambling, others for the violence, many for the stories they could whisper about later. But all were drawn by the visceral thrill of watching men test their limits without the sanitized rules of sanctioned competition. The announcer, a barrel-chested Ukrainian with a gold tooth and voice that could cut through concrete, stood at the center of the cage, microphone in hand. His name was Vasily, and he had mastered the art of turning blood into theater. Ladies and gentlemen, Vasily's voice echoed through speakers, commanding immediate silence. Our next fighter needs no introduction to those who follow real combat. The crowd stirred with anticipation. In the front row, nestled among oil oligarchs and fight promoters, sat a solitary figure. Chuck Norris wore a simple black button-up shirt and jeans, his presence understated yet unmistakable. His weathered face remained expressionless. Eyes focused on the cage with the calm assessment of someone who had seen countless battles, both choreographed and real. He hadn't come seeking attention. The underground fight promotion had invited him as a guest of honor, while he was in Eastern Europe filming a documentary on martial arts traditions. Fighting out of Tel Aviv, with a military record that would make most men tremble. Vasily continued, his voice rising with theatrical precision. 16 professional fights, 16 brutal victories, former Israeli Defense Forces commando, I give you, Eliev the Hammer Cohen. The speakers erupted with pounding bass as Cohen emerged from the tunnel. At 32, he moved with predatory grace, powerfully built but not bulky. His body, a weapon honed through years of military training and combat. His head was shaved clean, a thick beard framing a face marked by a single scar running along his right cheekbone. Hebrew tattoos spiraled down arms corded with muscle. But it was his eyes that drew attention, cold, calculating, yet burning with something dangerous. Unlike most fighters who entered with tight focus, Cohen played to the crowd. He raised his arms, soaking in their energy, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. In the fighter's corner, Leon Abramovich watched with thinning patience. The 58-year-old trainer had been a respected fighter in his day, before the sport's commercialization. He'd found Cohen 3 years ago, recognized his raw talent immediately, but increasingly struggled with his student's growing ego. Focus, Leon muttered as Cohen approached, knowing the admonishment would go unheeded. Cohen bounced on the balls of his feet, never taking his eyes off the tunnel from which his opponent would emerge. And his opponent? Vasily continued. A veteran of 30 professional fights. Representing Poland's Pitbull Fight Academy, Marek the Butcher Nowak. Nowak entered without music or fanfare. A 39-year-old former championship contender, whose career had begun its decline. Still dangerous. With cauliflower ears and a nose broken so many times it had forgotten its original shape, he carried himself with the quiet dignity of a craftsman. No theatrics, no taunts. Just a man coming to work. The two fighters stood at opposite corners while officials checked gloves and mouthguards. Cohen never stopped moving, his gaze repeatedly drifting toward the audience, particularly to the VIP section where he'd noticed Norris sitting. A slight smile played across his face. Leon recognized that look. Eliav. He gripped his fighter's shoulders, forcing eye contact. Stay present. This man has experience. Cohen nodded absently. Relax, old man. I've studied him. He's slow on his left. The bell rang. The crowd roared. The two fighters circled. Nowak approached with the measured patience of experience, hands high, movements economical. Cohen, by contrast, kept his guard provocatively low, inviting attack, confidence bordering on contempt. When Nowak finally committed to a jab, Cohen's counter was blindingly fast. A right cross that snapped the Polish fighter's head back, followed by a leg kick that echoed through the arena. The crowd erupted, sensing blood. Cohen glanced toward the VIP section, checking if Norris had noticed his handiwork. Eyes on your opponent, Leon shouted from the corner. But his words disappeared beneath the crowd's roar. Nowak recovered, pressing forward with a combination that momentarily backed Cohen against the cage. But the Israeli fighter slipped the final punch and countered with a savage elbow that opened a cut above Nowak's eye. That's right, Cohen taunted, just loud enough for Nowak and the closest spectators to hear. This isn't one of your tournament fights. Blood now trickling into his eye, Nowak pressed forward with renewed urgency. He managed to secure a clinch, driving Cohen against the fence, seeking to impose his wrestling advantage. For 30 seconds, they struggled in that position, the crowd growing restless until Cohen exploded with a series of short strikes to the ribs that forced Nowak to release his grip. As they separated, Cohen didn't pursue immediately. Instead, he circled, hands low again, smirking. Come on, old man. That the best you've got? Nowak's face remained impassive, but something shifted in his approach, a recognition that pride was now driving him to engage on his opponent's terms rather than following his own strategy. When he lunged forward with a telegraphed right hand, Cohen was ready. He slipped the punch perfectly and countered with a devastating hook that caught Nowak flush on the jaw. The Polish fighter's legs buckled instantly. Before he even hit the canvas, Cohen was already turning away, arms raised in victory. The referee rushed in to check on Nowak, who lay motionless except for the shallow rise and fall of his chest. Medics quickly entered the cage as silence briefly fell over the arena, the sudden transition from violence to medical emergency creating a moment of collective sobriety. But Cohen seemed oblivious to the shift. He paraded around the cage, flexing for the cameras that documented these underground events for specialized streaming services. When he passed Nowak, still being attended to by medics, he pointed down and laughed. "Who's next?" he shouted, his voice carrying through the now roaring arena. In his corner, Leon shook his head, disappointment evident in the set of his shoulders. This wasn't the fighter he'd agreed to train. Most of the crowd erupted in appreciation of the spectacular finish, though scattered throughout were uneasy glances. Spectators who enjoyed the fighting, but found the disrespect distasteful. In the front row, Chuck Norris remained perfectly still, his expression unchanged. Unlike those around him who leapt to their feet or shouted approval, he simply observed, eyes tracking Cohen's movement with the analytical patience of someone who had seen combat in all its forms, from choreographed movie scenes to real-life confrontations, and could distinguish between genuine skill and performative arrogance. Cohen noticed. In the midst of his celebration, his gaze repeatedly returned to Norris, noting the legend's lack of reaction. It needled him, in a way no opponent's punch ever had. As the medics helped Nowak to his feet, consciousness regained but pride still sprawled on the canvas. Cohen approached Vasily, hand extended for the microphone. The announcer, recognizing the potential for drama that would have the underground fight forums buzzing for weeks, happily obliged. Cohen wiped sweat from his brow, pacing the cage like a predator, feeding off the crowd's energy. His next words would change everything. Cohen held the microphone with the comfort of someone who knew how to command attention. His breath had barely quickened from the fight, a testament to how quickly and efficiently he had dismantled his opponent. Blood not his own spattered across his chest like war paint. He said, pointing to where Nowak was being helped through the tunnel, "Is what happens when you face a real fighter." The crowd roared its approval, the alcohol and adrenaline in their bloodstreams amplifying their reaction. Cell phones recorded every moment, despite the event's technically unauthorized status. In the shadows beyond the official cameras, dozens of screens captured what was unfolding. "You know what makes me laugh?" Cohen continued, now moving to the side of the cage nearest the VIP section. "These Hollywood types who play tough guys on screen." A ripple of anticipation moved through the crowd. Several heads turned toward Norris, who remained seated, expression unchanged. "They have stunt doubles. They have camera tricks. They have second takes." Cohen's voice rose with each statement. "But in here, no second chances, no breaks between scenes." He pointed directly at Norris now, the gesture so blatant that a spotlight operator instinctively swung the beam toward the martial arts legend. "Chuck Norris," Cohen's voice dripped with mock reverence. "The great American hero." The arena fell silent, the kind of silence that feels physical, pressing against eardrums, holding breath hostage in lungs. Even those who had been checking their phones now looked up, sensing a moment that would be remembered. "I grew up watching your movies," Cohen continued, pacing along the fence nearest Norris. "All that spinning kick nonsense works great with camera edits, doesn't it? But this," he gestured around the cage, "this is real fighting." From his corner, Leon made a cutting motion across his throat, trying to signal Cohen to stop, but the fighter was beyond reaching now, intoxicated by his own narrative. In the audience, reactions split instantly. Some laughed nervously. Others murmured in disapproval. A few began a hesitant, "Chuck, Chuck," chant that quickly died out when Norris himself showed no reaction. "Seriously," Cohen pressed on, "when was the last time you actually fought? Not for cameras. Not with stuntmen falling over for you. A real fight?" The air in the arena seemed to thicken. Security guards exchanged uneasy glances, uncertain about protocol for this unprecedented situation. "I respect your movies, man," Cohen said, the smirk undermining any sincerity. "But let's be honest, you're just Hollywood." Those last three words hung in the air like smoke. Vasily, sensing both danger and opportunity, stepped forward. "Perhaps we should move on to our next—" "No. No." Cohen cut him off. "I'm curious. The great Chuck Norris is right here. Does he have anything to say?" All eyes turned to Norris. The legend remained seated, posture unchanged, gaze steady. Unlike everyone else in the arena who seemed to vibrate with tension, He projected absolute calm. Then, with deliberate slowness, Norris rose to his feet. He wore no flashy clothes, no championship belt, no visible markers of his status. Just a simple black shirt, jeans, and the quiet confidence of a man who had nothing to prove. The crowd's reaction was immediate. Phones lifted higher. People stood for better views. A chant began in the back rows, "Chuck! Chuck! Chuck!" and spread like wildfire until it filled the arena. Cohen's smirk widened as he watched Norris stand. "Oh! He's actually going to respond." He turned to play to the crowd. "Should we give the Hollywood star some cage time?" The chant grew louder. Security personnel looked toward the event promoter, who nodded slightly. This unexpected development would be worth whatever complications followed. Norris began walking toward the cage, his movements unhurried. At 75, he moved with the fluid grace of someone who had dedicated his life to martial arts. Not as a performance, but as a discipline. The years had weathered his face, but had done nothing to diminish the centered presence he projected. Someone opened the gate for Mr. Hollywood. Cohen called out, bouncing lightly on his feet, playing the provocateur perfectly. As Norris reached the cage, a security guard rushed to open the gate. The legend stepped through with no ceremony, no acknowledgement of the cameras, no playing to the crowd that now chanted his name with increasing fervor. Inside the cage, Cohen circled lazily, his confidence so complete that he seemed genuinely amused rather than concerned. "So, Chuck," he said loudly enough for the front rows to hear, "you going to throw one of those fancy roundhouse kicks from your movies?" Norris said nothing. He simply stood, hands at his sides, watching Cohen with the patient assessment of someone who had faced opponents for over 5 decades. "No Walker Texas Ranger moves?" Cohen taunted, throwing shadow punches in Norris's direction. "Maybe you need your stunt double?" The crowd's energy shifted subtly, anticipation mixed with uncertainty. They had expected Norris to either decline the provocation or perhaps engage in some verbal sparring. His silent approach created a tension few had anticipated. Even Cohen seemed momentarily thrown by the lack of response. He glanced toward the crowd, then back at Norris, needing to recapture the narrative. "Look," Cohen said, voice slightly less certain, "I respect what you did back in the day. Tournament champion, right? But that was what, 40 years ago?" He circled closer. "This isn't a karate tournament with points and bows." Still, Norris remained silent, his eyes never leaving Cohen, his posture neither aggressive nor defensive, simply present. In his corner, Leon watched with growing unease. He had trained enough fighters to recognize when someone was making a fundamental mistake. "Eliev," he called out, "enough showboating. This isn't why we're here." But Cohen wasn't listening. He moved closer to Norris, entering his personal space, trying to provoke a reaction. "No cameras rolling now, Chuck. No director to yell cut when things get rough." For the first time, a subtle shift appeared in Norris's expression, not anger or irritation, but something more profound. A quiet acknowledgement of what was happening and what needed to happen next. Cohen noticed the change and misinterpreted it as uncertainty. His confidence surged anew. "Tell you what," he said, voice dripping with condescension, "I'll even let you throw the first—" The sentence remained unfinished. Without telegraphing his movement, without changing his expression, without any visible preparation, Norris simply closed the small gap between them. No wasted motion, no dramatic wind-up. Just the condensed efficiency of decades of training. The entire arena gasped collectively as Cohen suddenly found himself staring up at the ceiling lights, his equilibrium shattered by what felt like being hit by a precise bolt of lightning. He hadn't seen the strike, a simple, economic palm heel to the sternum that had interrupted his breathing and sent a shock through his nervous system. It wasn't cinematic. It wasn't showy. Just devastatingly effective. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. For a moment, silence gripped the arena. Then the crowd erupted, understanding they were witnessing something extraordinary. Cohen recovered quickly, athleticism and pride surging through him. His face flushed with a combination of embarrassment and anger as he found his footing. "Lucky shot," he snarled. All pretense of amusement gone. Norris still hadn't spoken a word. He simply resumed his neutral stance, waiting. In that moment, something fundamental changed in the underground arena. What had begun as a provocative stunt was transforming into an authentic clash between two philosophies of combat. One built on spectacle and dominance, the other on discipline and efficiency. Cohen, recognizing that his credibility was now at stake, settled into a proper fighting stance for the first time. The smirk was gone, replaced by focused intensity. The crowd's chant built again, "Chuck! Chuck! Chuck!" But Norris remained unmoved by it, his attention solely on the opponent before him. Cohen circled more cautiously now, reassessing. The easy victory he had imagined was clearly not forthcoming. But neither was he intimidated. He was, after all, in his prime, with recent combat experience and the muscle memory of countless real fights. "Okay, old man," he muttered. "Let's see what you've really got." As he launched forward with his first genuine attack, the legend awaited him with the patience of mountains. The attack came like lightning, a blinding combination of strikes designed to overwhelm with speed and power. Cohen moved with the fluid violence of someone trained to end confrontations decisively. His first punch cut through the air with killing intent, followed by an elbow strike that would have shattered bone had it connected. But it didn't connect. With minimal movement, Norris evaded each strike, not with the dramatic dodges of cinema, but with the subtle weight shifts and micro-adjustments of someone who had studied combat as a science. Where Cohen's movements were explosive and expansive, Norris's were contained and precise. The contrast was jarring. Cohen threw himself fully into each attack, while Norris seemed barely to move at all. Yet somehow, the older man was never where the strikes landed. Cohen pressed forward, frustration bleeding into his technique, making his movements fractionally less disciplined. "Fight back!" he growled between combinations. Still, Norris said nothing. His face remained impassive, his breathing controlled, his eyes alert but calm. When he did finally move to counter, the motion was so clean and economical that many in the audience almost missed it, a simple redirection of Cohen's energy that sent him momentarily off balance. The arena had fallen into an unusual hush. Gone were the alcohol-fueled shouts for blood, replaced by the collective held breath of people witnessing something they intrinsically recognized as extraordinary. The influencers had stopped narrating to their phone cameras. The gamblers had forgotten their bets. All watched with undivided attention. Leon observed from outside the cage, arms crossed, a grim satisfaction settling over him. He had warned Cohen countless times about the difference between winning fights and understanding combat. Now, perhaps, his student would finally grasp the lesson. Cohen regained his footing, circling more cautiously, reassessing. For the first time, doubt flickered across his face, not fear, but the disorienting recognition that his usual approach wasn't working. His gaze darted briefly toward the crowd, seeking their energy, but found only silent attention. "Lucky moves, old man," Cohen said, voice slightly less confident. "But you can't just dodge forever." He launched another attack, this one more measured, less telegraphed. A probing jab, followed by a sweeping kick at knee level. When Norris sidestepped these, Cohen was ready with a follow-up combination aimed at where the legend's head would be. But again, Norris wasn't there. Instead, Cohen felt a sharp impact against his lead leg, a perfectly timed check that sent a jolt of pain up his thigh. Before he could adjust, a straight palm strike to his chest created separation, the force so precisely applied that it disrupted his breathing without causing damage. Cohen stumbled back, genuine surprise replacing cockiness. He had fought special forces operators, professional fighters, street brawlers with nothing to lose, but never had he experienced this level of control from an opponent. In the crowd, a murmur spread as the dynamic became clear. A fighter, who had minutes ago seemed invincible, was now struggling against a man nearly twice his age. Phones recorded frantically, capturing what everyone sensed was becoming a legendary encounter. "Enough playing around," Cohen muttered, more to himself than his opponent. He centered himself, drew a deep breath, and committed fully to his next attack, a blistering series of strikes thrown with expert technique and genuine killing intent. This wasn't showmanship anymore. This was a fighter determined to reassert his dominance. For the first time, Norris engaged directly rather than simply evading. His blocks were precise, his counters immediate. Where Cohen fought with explosive power, Norris moved with such efficiency that his techniques seemed almost gentle, until they connected, at which point their devastating precision became apparent. A subtle redirect of Cohen's punch left the younger fighter momentarily open. Norris exploited the gap with a short strike to the floating ribs that halted Cohen's advance instantly. Not a knockout blow, but a demonstration of vulnerability. The message was clear. I could end this whenever I choose. Cohen felt it. The crowd saw it. Leon nodded silently from the corner. But pride and training don't surrender easily. Cohen reset his stance, eyes now showing the focus that had made him formidable in real combat scenarios. Gone was the performer playing to the crowd. In his place stood a warrior, acknowledging a worthy opponent. "Okay," he said quietly, a new respect in his tone. "Let's do this properly." What followed was no longer a mismatch, but a genuine exchange between fighters, one powered by youth and strength, the other by experience and efficiency. For nearly a minute, they engaged in a dance of attack and counter, each testing the other's defenses, each learning the other's patterns. The crowd watched in reverent silence, understanding they were witnessing not just a fight but a pure demonstration of martial arts principles. Even those who had come for blood found themselves appreciating the technical mastery on display. Then came the moment. Cohen, having identified what he believed was a pattern in Norris's movement, committed to a perfectly executed combination, a feint followed by a vicious hook that should have found its mark. But Norris had been setting up this moment. As Cohen's punch cut through where the legend's head should have been, Norris had already moved inside his guard. With positioning that made physics itself seem complicit, he executed a simple turning technique that used Cohen's momentum against him. To the audience, it appeared almost gentle, as if Norris were guiding rather than throwing his opponent. Yet Cohen found himself airborne, gravity forgotten, until it suddenly reasserted itself with brutal finality. He hit the canvas with an impact that echoed through the arena, the air driven from his lungs. For 2 heartbeats, complete silence held the arena in its grip. Then the crowd erupted not with bloodlust but with awe. They had expected entertainment. They had received enlightenment. Cohen lay on the mat, conscious but disoriented, his understanding of combat fundamentally altered in the space of seconds. When he looked up, Norris stood above him, not in triumph, not with a celebratory pose, but simply present. And then, For the first time since entering the cage, Chuck Norris spoke. His voice wasn't raised, but somehow it carried to every corner of the suddenly hushed arena. "The difference between fighting and martial arts," he said, extending his hand toward Cohen, "is that one destroys, while the other builds." In that moment, with those simple words, the entire atmosphere transformed. What had begun as spectacle had become something approaching sacred, a transmission of knowledge that transcended entertainment. Cohen stared at the offered hand, pride wrestling with respect. In his eyes flickered the struggle between the fighter he had been and the martial artist he could become. Around them, the crowd held its collective breath, witnessing something few had expected when they entered the underground arena that night. Not just violence, but its transcendence. Cohen's hand trembled slightly as he reached up, clasping Norris's extended palm. The moment their hands connected, something passed between them, not just the physical assistance helping Cohen to his feet, but a silent acknowledgement, a torch of understanding. The crowd's reactions swelled into something approaching reverence. Phones still raised high but somehow more respectful in their documentation. They had come for blood sport, but found themselves witnesses to something approaching philosophy enacted through combat. As Cohen regained his footing, a complex mixture of emotions crossed his face. Humiliation warred with respect, anger with admiration. His chest rose and fell with labored breath, not from exertion, but from the profound disorientation of having his reality so thoroughly upended. "I don't," he started, then stopped, words failing him. Norris met his gaze directly, his expression neither triumphant nor condescending, just present, attentive, waiting. In the silence that stretched between them, the arena seemed to hold its breath. Vasily, the announcer, sensing both the power and fragility of the moment, approached the cage cautiously but didn't enter. The cameras continued rolling, capturing what everyone recognized was no longer a spectacle, but a genuine human moment. Then something shifted in Cohen's eyes, a hardening, a retreat behind walls of pride. The flicker of vulnerability vanished, replaced by the familiar mask of arrogance. Self-preservation overrode insight. "Lucky throw," he muttered, just loud enough for Norris and those closest to the cage to hear. "Caught me off balance." A ripple of disappointment moved through the crowd. Those who had sensed the potential for transformation now witnessed its rejection. Phones lowered slightly, the moment's magic dimming. Norris's expression didn't change, but something subtle shifted in his posture. Not disappointment, but acceptance. He had offered a door. Cohen had chosen to keep it closed. "Perhaps," Norris said quietly, his first words since the brief statement after the throw. He stepped back, creating space between them. Cohen, desperate to reclaim his narrative, turned to the crowd. "You enjoyed the show?" he called out, arms spread wide, attempting to transform his defeat into a performance. The response was tepid, scattered cheers mixed with uncertain murmurs. The atmosphere had irrevocably changed. What had been a gladiatorial arena had briefly transformed into something more profound. And the audience, despite itself, had glimpsed a deeper truth about combat than most fight venues ever revealed. In his corner, Leon shook his head slowly. He had hoped, just for a moment, that his fighter might grasp the lesson being offered. But ego, once entrenched, surrenders territory grudgingly. Norris turned away from Cohen, moving toward the cage door with the same unhurried composure that had marked his entrance. His purpose had been fulfilled. Nothing more needed to be said or demonstrated. Something about this dismissal, this quiet turning away, pierced Cohen's defenses more deeply than the physical defeat. To be rendered not just defeated but irrelevant, struck at the core of his identity. "Hey!" he called after Norris, voice sharp with wounded pride. "We're not finished here." The legend paused at the cage door, turning partially back. His expression remained calm, but his eyes held a new quality, not anger, but a clear, penetrating assessment. "Yes," he said simply. "We are." Those 3 words, delivered without heat but with absolute finality, landed with more impact than any physical blow. The crowd felt it. Cohen felt it. Even Vasily, veteran of countless fights, sensed the weight of that quiet declaration. But pride, when mortally wounded, often lashes out with desperate ferocity. Cohen's composure shattered completely. He lunged forward, not with the technical precision he'd shown earlier, but with the raw, undisciplined rage of a man whose self-image was disintegrating before an audience. "Don't you walk away from me!" he shouted, closing the distance with reckless speed. What happened next occurred so quickly that many in the audience would later debate exactly what they'd seen. One moment Cohen was charging forward, the next he was on the canvas again, not thrown this time, but dropped by a single precise strike to a pressure point that disrupted his nervous system without causing lasting damage. Norris hadn't even appeared to shift his weight. Just a minimal movement, a perfect understanding of anatomy, and an application of knowledge so refined, it appeared almost supernatural to the untrained eye. Cohen lay stunned, consciousness intact, but body temporarily betraying his commands. The humiliation was now complete. Not just defeated, but incapacitated with such economy of effort that his earlier boasts seemed like a child's fantasy. Norris looked down at him without contempt, without pride, without any visible emotion, save perhaps a faint sadness. He said, voice quiet yet carrying in the stunned silence of the arena, "Masters himself before attempting to defeat others." With that, he turned and exited the cage, leaving Cohen to grapple not just with physical defeat, but with the far more devastating collapse of his carefully constructed identity. As the legend disappeared into the tunnel leading from the arena, the crowd remained frozen in a moment of collective processing. They had witnessed not just a fight, but a parable enacted in flesh and blood. In the center of the cage, Cohen slowly regained control of his limbs, pushing himself to his knees. His face, when he finally lifted it, revealed something broken behind his eyes. The cocky fighter who had entered the cage earlier that night was gone, leaving behind a man confronting fundamental questions about strength, about combat, about himself. Leon entered the cage, kneeling beside his fighter. He placed a hand on Cohen's shoulder, not in consolation, but in silent acknowledgement of a necessary lesson. "Now," the trainer said quietly, "you can begin to learn." Around them, the underground arena slowly returned to life conversations, resuming, lights shifting, reality reasserting itself. But something had changed. Those who had come seeking mere violence had been shown the difference between destruction and discipline. As Cohen was helped to his feet, the crowd's response was not mockery but a quiet, almost solemn recognition. They had witnessed something authentic in an arena too often dedicated to spectacle. In the tunnel leading from the arena, Chuck Norris walked steadily, his pace unhurried. He had not come seeking this confrontation, but neither had he shied from the responsibility it presented. Some lessons can only be delivered through direct experience. Behind him, the sounds of the arena faded. Ahead lay the quiet night, and the knowledge that sometimes the most powerful statement is made not through force, but through its transcendence. 3 hours later, the underground arena stood nearly empty. Workers dismantled the cage with practiced efficiency, the metallic clang of disconnecting panels echoing through the cavernous space. Discarded betting slips littered the floor alongside crushed cups and the scattered detritus of the evening spectacle. The smell of sweat, beer, and fading adrenaline hung in the air, the invisible signature of combat's aftermath. In a small room behind the arena, a converted storage closet, serving as the fighters' preparation area, Eliav Cohen sat alone. The harsh fluorescent light cast his face in unflattering shadows, highlighting every line of exhaustion and doubt that the bright arena lights had previously concealed. His hands, now unwrapped, lay open on his knees, palms up as if offering something to an unseen recipient. The sweat had long since dried on his skin, leaving salt trails like tear tracks. He had not spoken since being helped from the cage. Not to Leon, not to the medics who checked him for concussion, not to the promoter who awkwardly mentioned something about great footage before reading the room and backing away. In the silence of the small room, the events of the evening replayed in his mind, not as the triumphant narrative he had constructed for himself over years, but as something far more humbling. The memory of Norris's movements haunted him, their precision, their economy, their absolute assurance devoid of any need to impress or intimidate. The door opened quietly. Leon entered, carrying 2 paper cups of black coffee. The trainer's face showed neither satisfaction nor disappointment. Only the patient assessment of someone who recognized a pivotal moment when he saw one. Without a word, he placed 1 cup beside Cohen and took a seat on the bench opposite his fighter. Silence stretched between them. Not uncomfortable, but pregnant with unspoken understanding. Leon sipped his coffee, giving Cohen the space to find his way to words. The overhead light flickered occasionally, an intermittent pulse that marked time's passage in the windowless room. "I've never—" Cohen finally began, then stopped, searching for language adequate to the experience. His voice sounded strange to his own ears, as if it belonged to someone else, someone less certain, less defined by unshakable confidence. It wasn't like fighting a person. It was like fighting time itself. Leon nodded slowly, the simple gesture acknowledging depths to the observation that others might have missed. "Chuck Norris has been practicing martial arts since before you were born. What you felt wasn't just a man's technique. It was decades of understanding compressed into moments." Cohen stared at his hands as if seeing them for the first time. The calluses, the small scars, the strength he had cultivated through countless hours of training, all suddenly seemed inadequate. Like tools built for one purpose, being asked to serve another entirely. "He could have hurt me. Badly. At any point. It wasn't a question. Yes. But he chose not to." Leon set his coffee aside, the paper cup crinkling softly. "That's the difference between a fighter and a martial artist. One seeks to destroy. The other seeks to transcend destruction." Outside their room, the sounds of the arena being dismantled continued, metal on metal. Orders being called. The physical world being restored to order. But within the small space, something more delicate was being reconstructed, a self-understanding that had been shattered and now sought new form. "I've won medals," Cohen said, voice barely above a whisper. "I've fought in actual combat. Real life. Or death situations." His eyes finally lifted to meet Leon's, revealing a vulnerability previously hidden beneath layers of bravado. How could he make all of that feel inadequate? Leon leaned forward, elbows on knees. The fluorescent light cast deep shadows beneath his eyes, emphasizing the weight of experience behind his words. "You've mastered techniques. He's mastered principles." The trainer's voice held no judgment, only clarity. "You fight with your body. He fights with his entire being." Cohen absorbed this, turning the concept over like an unfamiliar object whose purpose remained unclear yet intriguing. The coffee beside him cooled, untouched, its bitter aroma filling the small space with the promise of clarity. Can that be learned? For the first time that night, Leon smiled not broadly, but genuinely. The expression transformed his weathered face, revealing the teacher who had always existed beneath the trainer's stern exterior. "That," he said, "is the first question of a true student." The sounds of dismantling beyond their door reached a crescendo, and then began to fade, marking the final stages of the arena's transformation back into an anonymous warehouse. Soon the night's events would exist only in memory and in the digital records captured by countless phones, a moment preserved yet already being reinterpreted through the subjective lenses of those who had witnessed it. "I keep seeing it," Cohen admitted, his gaze now distant. "Not just what happened, but what could have happened. The openings I left, the assumptions I made." He ran a hand over his face, the gesture both self-comforting and self-chiding. "I thought I was testing him. But he was. I don't know. Reading me. Seeing through me." Leon nodded, recognition in his eyes. "The best fighters see your body. The best martial artists see your intentions. The true masters see your nature." He paused, letting the distinction settle. "You encountered someone who has spent his life cultivating the ability to see truly." Cohen reached for his coffee, needing something to occupy his hands. The liquid had cooled to lukewarm, its bitterness more pronounced without heat to soften it. He drank anyway, accepting the unpleasant taste as fitting for the moment's clarity. "The crowd," he said after a moment. "They witnessed it all." "Yes. My reputation is what you make it from this point forward," Leon interjected, his tone firm but not unkind. "Tonight can be an ending or a beginning. That choice belongs to you." Cohen set the half-empty cup aside. For a man accustomed to decisive action, to clear victories and defeats, this new terrain of internal transformation presented a different kind of challenge, one where the opponent was his own perception, his own identity constructed over years of success and adulation. "I don't know how to start again," he admitted, the words costing him more than any physical pain ever had. Leon stood, stretching slightly to relieve the stiffness of the hard bench. "You already have. By asking the question, you've taken the first step." From somewhere in the building came the sound of a door slamming, followed by receding footsteps. The night was ending. Decisions made now would shape what came after. "Get some rest," Leon said, moving toward the door. "Tomorrow, we begin differently." Cohen nodded, not yet rising from his seated position. The thought of facing the outside world, the comments, the videos, the inevitable dissection of his humbling felt overwhelming. Yet beneath that anxiety stirred something else. A quiet curiosity about what might exist beyond the narrow identity he had constructed for himself. "Leon," he called as the trainer reached for the door handle. "Thank you for staying." The older man paused, his expression softening momentarily. A true teacher doesn't abandon a student at the moment of greatest learning. With that, he departed, leaving Cohen alone with thoughts that no longer circled around defeat but tentatively explored the possibility of transformation. Elsewhere in the building, in a private room reserved for VIPs and fight promoters, Chuck Norris sat across from Mikhail Baranov, the oligarch who owned the underground fighting operation. The room stood in stark contrast to the fighters' preparation area. Plush, leather sofas, subdued lighting from elegant sconces. A selection of premium spirits displayed on a polished oak bar. Between them, an untouched glass of expensive whiskey sat before Norris, while Baranov nursed a tumbler of his own. "You understand what happened tonight, yes?" Baranov's English carried a heavy Russian accent but was precisely articulated, each word chosen with the care of someone who had built an empire through careful communication. "Videos are already everywhere. My servers crashed from traffic." Norris remained impassive, hands resting lightly on the table. His posture betrayed neither pride nor concern, only the centered presence that had unnerved Cohen in the cage. "I didn't come here for publicity." Baranov waved this away. Gold cufflinks catching the light. "Of course not. But we live in an age where everything becomes content." He leaned forward slightly, the leather sofa creaking beneath his substantial frame. "I could offer you a substantial sum for exclusive rights to the footage." "No." The response came without hesitation, without anger, but with absolute finality. The single syllable seemed to absorb sound around it, creating a pocket of certainty in a room designed for negotiation. Baranov studied him, head tilted slightly. Unlike most who had built empires in post-Soviet capitalism, he had not survived by failing to read people correctly. What he saw in Norris wasn't self-righteousness or moral superiority, but a fundamental disinterest in the currency Baranov typically traded in. "May I ask why you agreed to attend tonight at all?" Genuine curiosity colored his voice. "You must have known the environment." Norris was silent for a moment, gaze steady. The room's carefully designed acoustics absorbed the distant sounds of the arena's dismantling, creating an illusion of complete separation from the world beyond its walls. "I was documenting traditional martial arts in the region. Your invitation mentioned several former champions would be present. I came to pay respects to their knowledge." "Not for the spectacle?" Baranov pressed, swirling amber liquid in his glass. "No. And yet you provided the greatest spectacle of the night." A thin smile crossed the oligarch's face, revealing teeth too perfect to be natural. "Life is full of ironies." Norris stood, movements fluid and unhurried. Where Cohen's physicality announced itself with every gesture, Norris's seemed almost to recede from notice, present but undemanding of attention. What happened tonight wasn't a spectacle. It was a conversation. He turned to leave, but Baranov's voice stopped him at the door. "He will never be the same, you know, Cohen." The oligarch swirled his whiskey thoughtfully, light playing across its surface. "You didn't just defeat him. You altered his path." Norris paused, hand on the door handle. Something in Baranov's observation warranted acknowledgement, not the pride of victory, but recognition of responsibility that came with impact. "Each person chooses their own path," he said quietly. "I simply revealed a fork in his." With that, he departed, leaving Baranov alone with his whiskey and thoughts. The oligarch remained seated for several minutes, contemplating what he had witnessed. As a man who had built a fortune by understanding value, he recognized that he had seen something rare tonight, not just skill or technique, but wisdom embodied. Such things existed beyond price, which made them all the more precious in a world where everything else seemed available for purchase. Outside the repurposed warehouse, the Budapest night had turned cold, a light rain falling on empty streets. The city's ancient beauty was muted by darkness and moisture, buildings looming like sentinels against the clouded sky. A black sedan waited, engine running, driver discreetly attentive. As Norris approached, the rear door opened automatically. Before entering, he paused, looking back at the nondescript building. Light spilled from a few high windows, the only indication of the drama that had unfolded within its walls. In the distance, police sirens wailed, unrelated to the underground event, but a reminder of the line between sanctioned and unsanctioned combat. The rain fell more heavily now, droplets illuminated momentarily by the sedan's headlights before disappearing into the darkness. Norris felt the cold seep through his light jacket, but made no move to hurry. At 75, he had learned to accept discomfort as simply another state of being, neither to be sought nor avoided, but experienced fully when present. Inside the car, his longtime friend and documentary partner, David Chen, looked up from a camera where he'd been reviewing footage from their legitimate martial arts documentation. Chen had worked with Norris for over 30 years, their partnership built on shared respect for traditions that prioritize discipline over spectacle. "You're back earlier than expected," David noted, then studied Norris's face more carefully. The interior light revealed details invisible in the night outside: the subtle tension around the eyes, the slight compression of the lips that indicated significant events had transpired. Something happened. It wasn't a question. After 3 decades of friendship, David could read the subtle shifts in Norris's demeanor that others might miss entirely. "A teaching moment," Norris said simply, settling into the leather seat. Water beaded on his jacket, catching light from the car's interior. David knew better than to press immediately. He instructed the driver to head back to their hotel, then waited as the car pulled away from the curb, tires hissing on wet pavement. Budapest by night slid past the windows, ancient architecture and modern signage coexisting in the layered reality of a city where past and present maintained constant dialogue. "The footage is already online," David finally said, holding up his phone to show a video playing on silent, shaky footage captured from the audience, showing the confrontation in fragmented, imperfect detail. "Someone named Eliev Cohen challenged you?" Norris gazed out the window at the passing city lights. Their glow diffused through raindrops on glass. He challenged a perception. The reality was educational for him. David had worked with Chuck long enough to understand the deeper currents beneath his measured words. In their years of documenting martial traditions across continents, they had encountered countless variations of the same fundamental human struggle, the balancing of ego against discipline, of external validation against internal understanding. "You've spent your life trying to communicate that martial arts isn't about fighting, but about living," David observed, setting his phone aside. "Some people need more direct instruction." A faint smile touched Norris's lips, visible as reflection in the rain-streaked window. "As my teacher once told me, some lessons must be felt to be understood." The car turned onto a main boulevard, the grand architecture of Budapest, glowing amber in the night. Trams rattled past, their warm interiors filled with the last passengers of the evening. Norris watched the city pass, mind not on the evening's confrontation but on the responsibility that came with knowledge, the obligation to transmit understanding rather than merely demonstrate superiority. "Do you think he learned?" David asked after a comfortable silence had stretched between them. The question contained no judgment, only curiosity about human potential for change. Norris considered this, his reflection thoughtful in the darkened window. Rain patterns shifted across the glass, creating ever-changing textures that mirrored the fluid nature of understanding itself. "Learning is a journey, not a destination. He's taken his first real step." The sedan slowed as they approached their hotel, a renovated 19th-century building that balanced historical character with modern comfort. Its illuminated facade stood dignified against the night, windows glowing with soft light. "And the documentary?" David asked, bringing their focus back to the project that had brought them to Budapest in the first place. "Continues tomorrow," Norris replied, his tone suggesting the evening's detour, while significant, remained separate from their primary purpose. The Tanaka Dojo at 9. As the car pulled to a stop beneath the hotel's covered entrance, Norris felt a sense of completion, not of mission or purpose, but of cycle. The confrontation with Cohen had been neither sought nor avoided. It had simply been necessary, a moment where paths crossed and truth was transmitted through the most direct means available. The rain continued to fall as they exited the car, silver droplets catching light from the hotel's elegant sconces. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, its own opportunities for transmission and understanding. The lesson delivered tonight would find its own path through Cohen, through those who witnessed it, through the digital record that would circulate beyond control or intention. Such was the nature of teaching. One could choose the lesson, but never fully determine how it would be received or what fruit it might ultimately bear. That uncertainty wasn't a limitation, but the very essence of transmission itself. The living quality that prevented knowledge from becoming mere doctrine. As they entered the hotel's warm lobby, leaving wet footprints on polished marble, Norris felt neither pride nor concern about the evening's events. Like rain falling into a river, some interactions simply became part of the greater flow, their individual significance absorbed into the broader current of human experience. Back at the arena, Cohen had finally risen from his bench. His movements were stiff, not from physical injury, but from the weight of recognition settling into his bones. He stared at his reflection in a small, cracked mirror on the wall, seeing his face as if for the first time. The question that had begun forming in the cage now crystallized into clarity, demanding answer. "What happens now?" he asked. Words directed at Leon, but eyes still fixed on his reflection. The trainer stood beside him, their eyes meeting in the mirror. "Now we begin again. First principles. The other fighters will talk. They'll say I was exposed." Leon nodded. "Yes. Let them. My reputation was built on sand." Leon interrupted, voice firm but not unkind. "Now we have the chance to build on stone." Cohen turned from the mirror, facing his trainer directly. The arrogance had been scoured from his face, leaving something raw but receptive in its place, the beginning of humility, the foundation of wisdom. "I want to understand what happened tonight," he said. "Not just the techniques. Whatever it was I felt when he moved." For the first time in 3 years of working together, Leon saw something genuine in his fighter's eyes. Not the performed intensity of someone playing a role, but the authentic humility of a student ready to learn. "Then we begin with emptiness," Leon said. "Before you can fill a cup, you must first make it hollow." Cohen nodded slowly, processing this. Outside, a worker dropped something metal with a resounding crash that echoed through the emptying building. Both men looked toward the sound, then back to each other. "I'm ready," Cohen said, the words carrying the weight of transformation. 6 months passed. Spring arrived in Budapest with capricious moods, brilliant sunshine giving way to sudden downpours, warm afternoons followed by frost-tinged dawns. The city shook off winter's grip gradually, reluctantly, much as a fighter rises slowly after being knocked down. Cherry blossoms along the Danube emerged tentatively, their delicate pink petals occasionally swept away by lingering winter winds. A visual reminder of beauty's fragility and persistence. In a converted warehouse across the river from the famous underground arena, Leon had established a new training facility. Unlike the commercial gyms with their branded equipment and mirror-lined walls, this space was deliberately Spartan wooden floors worn smooth by dedicated practice, simple equipment chosen for function rather than appearance, large windows that admitted natural light without filtration or embellishment. The morning sun cast geometric patterns across the open floor, highlighting dust motes that danced in the quiet air. At its center, Cohen moved through a series of forms. His body, always athletic, had changed subtly. He carried less muscle mass but moved with greater fluidity, less emphasis on power, and more on connected movement. The aggressive energy that had once defined his presence had been replaced by something more contained, more centered, like a flame brought under control rather than extinguished. Leon watched from the edge of the room, arms crossed, expression neutral. His eyes tracked Cohen's movements with the practiced assessment of someone who had observed thousands of hours of training across decades. "Again," he said simply, with less thought. Cohen nodded, returning to the starting position without complaint or hesitation. 6 months earlier, such instruction would have triggered impatience, perhaps even anger, a dismissal of basics as beneath someone of his accomplishment. Now, he accepted it as necessary guidance on a path he had only begun to walk. The warehouse was quiet save for the sound of Cohen's controlled breathing and the occasional distant rumble of trams crossing the Liberty Bridge. No music, no spectators, no cameras, just the essential elements of transmission and practice. As he moved through the sequence once more, his mind cleared further. The techniques were becoming less conscious actions and more natural expressions, like breath or heartbeat. Not quite internalized, but moving in that direction. When his hand extended, it no longer sought to dominate space but to harmonize with it. When his stance shifted, it found stability through relationship with the ground rather than imposition upon it. Better, Leon acknowledged when Cohen completed the forms. The single word, offered without embellishment, carried more meaning than the effusive praise that had once surrounded the fighter's public performances. Your body is learning what your mind still struggles to accept. Cohen wiped sweat from his brow with a small towel, considering this observation. That control matters more than power? Leon shook his head slightly, reaching for a water bottle and offering it to his student. That they are not separate things. Cohen accepted the water, drinking deeply as he absorbed this concept. The cool liquid traced its path downward. A physical sensation that grounded philosophical reflection. His journey over the past months had been neither easy nor linear. There had been frustrations, regressions, moments of doubt where old habits reasserted themselves with the persistence of weeds breaking through concrete. The fighter he had been continued to wrestle with the martial artist he sought to become. The warehouse fell silent again. Morning light strengthened, eliminating shadows while revealing new textures in the wooden floor. Grain patterns, telling stories of growth, resistance, adaptation. Cohen placed the water bottle carefully on a nearby bench, his movements more measured than they had been half a year ago. There's something I need to tell you, Leon said, breaking into Cohen's reflections. His tone carried no special emphasis, yet Cohen immediately sensed the significance of what would follow. Chuck Norris is returning to Budapest next week. Cohen's rhythm faltered briefly before he steadied himself. The name still carried emotional weight, not bitterness exactly, but the unavoidable association with the night his understanding of combat had been fundamentally rewritten. He felt a complex mixture of sensations. The ghost of humiliation. A flicker of defensiveness. But beneath these, something unexpected. A quiet curiosity. Almost anticipation. Is he fighting? Cohen asked, the question partly serious, partly ironic. Leon's mouth quirked in a half-smile, the expression softening his weathered features. No, he's completing the documentary he was working on when you two met. He'll be giving a seminar at the Cultural Center. Through the large windows, clouds briefly obscured the sun, sending muted shadows sweeping across the training floor like thoughts crossing consciousness. Cohen nodded, processing this information with greater equanimity than he might have managed months earlier. And you're telling me because? Because I've arranged for you to attend. Leon's tone made clear this wasn't merely a suggestion, but an integral part of Cohen's development. The trainer reached for his own water, giving his student space to process this unexpected development. Cohen was silent for a moment, moving to the window to gaze out at the Budapest skyline. The city stretched before him, ancient and modern intertwined, history and present in constant dialogue. Conflicting impulses rose and falling within him like the variable spring weather. The old Cohen would have refused immediately, protecting ego through avoidance. The person he was becoming recognized something different. An opportunity, perhaps even a necessary completion of what had begun 6 months ago. Finally, he nodded, turning back to face his teacher. I'll be there. Not as the person you were, Leon cautioned, his eyes serious. That would dishonor both the lesson and yourself. I understand. And to his surprise, Cohen realized he genuinely did. The prospect of seeing Norris again didn't trigger the defensive pride he might have expected. Instead, he felt something approaching gratitude, complicated, and not entirely comfortable, but genuine, nonetheless. What had seemed like humiliation now appeared increasingly as liberation, painful but necessary, like setting a broken bone to enable proper healing. The week passed quickly, each day filled with regular practice and mental preparation. Cohen continued his training with renewed focus, aware that he was preparing not for a physical confrontation, but for a more profound test of character. Each morning began with meditation, 30 minutes of simple breathing practice that he had initially resisted as doing nothing, but now recognized as essential foundation work. Each evening ended with reflection, examining the day's experiences without judgment or attachment. The path between those points filled with practice, study, and the gradual reconstruction of his relationship with combat itself. His public persona had changed dramatically since the incident, as fighting forums now called it. Once prolific on social media, showcasing victories and cultivating his brand, Cohen had withdrawn almost completely from the digital realm. The viral video of his encounter with Norris had generated millions of views, countless memes, and a brief but intense wave of mockery that might once have destroyed him. Instead, it had paradoxically created space for transformation by shattering the image he had so carefully constructed. The night before the seminar, Cohen sat in his apartment, staring at the cup that still occupied its place on his shelf. 6 months of daily practice had changed his relationship with stillness. Where once he had been uncomfortable with silence, filling it with boasts, challenges, constant motion, now he recognized it as the foundation from which all meaningful action arose. The cup, ordinary in appearance, had become a teacher more profound than any technique. His phone buzzed with a news alert. Curious, he checked the screen to find an article about Chuck Norris's documentary project. The piece mentioned the viral underground fight, in passing but focused primarily on Norris's efforts to document and preserve traditional martial arts lineages facing extinction in the modern world. The article quoted Norris discussing how combat sports had value, but differed fundamentally from traditional martial arts in both purpose and practice. Cohen read the article twice, struck by how differently he now perceived both Norris and his own role in their encounter. What had seemed like humiliation now appeared as necessary correction, painful but ultimately beneficial, like the fever that burns away infection. He set his phone aside and prepared for sleep, knowing the following day would complete a circle begun 6 months earlier. As he lay in darkness, his thoughts drifted not to techniques or strategies, but to questions of purpose and meaning, what it truly meant to cultivate strength, to develop skill, to embody discipline rather than merely display it. Morning arrived with gentle rain that cleansed Budapest's ancient streets, leaving the air fresh and buildings gleaming in diffused light. The cultural center occupied a renovated 19th-century building near the heart of the city, its neoclassical facade adorned with subtle Japanese architectural influences, a fitting location for a gathering focused on the transmission of martial traditions across cultural boundaries. Cohen arrived early, dressed simply in black pants and a gray shirt. No logos, no fight team affiliations, no visible markers of status or achievement. His appearance, like his approach, had been stripped to essentials. Leon met him at the entrance, nodding approval at both his punctuality and his presentation. "Remember," the trainer said quietly as they entered the elegant foyer with its marble floors and traditional calligraphy scrolls, "you are here to learn, not to be seen." The main hall had been transformed into a training space. Mats covered the ornate floor, and simple calligraphy scrolls hung on the walls. Japanese characters representing concepts like harmony, discipline, and respect. About 40 people were already present, warming up or conversing quietly in small groups. Some wore traditional gis, others simple workout clothes. The atmosphere carried neither the electric anticipation of fight night nor the casual energy of a typical gym class, but rather a focused attentiveness. People gathered not for spectacle, but for transmission. Cohen and Leon found places at the back of the room, settling into Caesar, the formal kneeling position that Cohen had initially found uncomfortable, but now appreciated for its combination of stability and readiness. From this position, Cohen observed the other attendees. They ranged widely in age and apparent experience, from teenagers to elderly practitioners, from obvious beginners to those who moved with the unconscious grace of decades of training. All shared a quality of presence that Cohen had only recently begun to recognize in himself, attention fully invested in the current moment. A door at the side of the room opened, and Chuck Norris entered alongside an elderly Japanese man, whom Cohen assumed was the local sensei. The room fell silent immediately, attention focusing on the two masters with an intensity that required no enforcement. Respect flowed naturally, not from celebrity or accomplishment, but from the embodied wisdom both men carried. Norris looked exactly as he had 6 months earlier, composed, centered, moving with an economy that suggested no wasted energy. His age was evident in the lines of his face, the silver of his hair, but these seemed irrelevant to the quality of presence he projected. If he noticed Cohen among the attendees, he gave no indication, his attention fully on the present moment and the responsibility of transmission. The seminar began with formal bows and brief introductions. The elderly Japanese master, introduced as Tanaka Hiroshi, spoke briefly in accented English about the importance of preserving traditional knowledge in modern times. Then Norris moved to the center of the mats and began demonstrating fundamental principles rather than flashy techniques. He spoke about the relationship between breath and movement, between intention and execution, between individual techniques and holistic understanding. When he demonstrated applications with a senior student, Cohen observed how completely different Norris's movement quality was from anything seen in competitive fighting, not better or worse, but fundamentally distinct in purpose and expression. Where competition sought to dominate through force, this approach sought to harmonize through understanding. From his position at the back, Cohen watched with new eyes. Where once he might have dismissed such basics as beneath his attention, now he recognized them as the foundation upon which all advanced skills were built. Every movement Norris demonstrated contained layers of meaning, physical applications nested within philosophical principles, each informing the other in continuous dialogue. When the group broke into pairs for practice, Cohen worked with Leon, focusing intently on reproducing not just the external form of the techniques, but their internal essence. Occasionally, Norris would circulate through the room, offering quiet corrections or demonstrations. Cohen noticed how the legend's teaching style mirrored his fighting approach, minimal, precise, focused on principles rather than individual instances. He never demonstrated power for its own sake, yet every movement contained potential energy that could be felt rather than seen. Midway through the 3-hour seminar, during a water break, Cohen found himself standing near a window, gazing out at Budapest's skyline. The rain had stopped, leaving the city glistening beneath breaking clouds. He sensed, rather than heard, someone approach, and turned to find Norris beside him. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence between them held the memory of their previous encounter, but without antagonism, more like a reference point, a shared understanding that needed no verbal acknowledgement. "You're training differently now," Norris observed finally, his tone conversational rather than judgmental. Cohen nodded, surprised by the lack of defensiveness he felt. "I'm trying to understand rather than simply execute. That's the beginning of the true path." Norris's gaze shifted to the city beyond the window, sunlight now breaking through clouds to illuminate ancient spires and modern structures alike. Technical skill without understanding is just choreography. I've been watching A Cup of Water, Cohen said. The admission surprising even himself. It seemed simultaneously trivial and profound, both the simplest practice and the most fundamental. A small smile touched Norris's lips. Recognition, rather than amusement. An ancient exercise with modern relevance. What have you learned? A.T. Cohen considered the question seriously, wanting to honor both the practice and the inquiry. That stillness contains movement. That what appears empty may actually be full. He paused, formulating the insight that had been gradually emerging over months of observation. That strength isn't about dominating space, but about harmonizing with it. Norris nodded, approval evident in his eyes. Continue on this path. It never ends, but every step brings new clarity. With that, he returned to the center of the room to resume instruction. The exchange had been brief, barely a minute of conversation, but Cohen felt its significance deeply. Not forgiveness exactly, for there was nothing to forgive, but acknowledgement of growth, of potential, of shared respect for the discipline that connected them despite their different journeys. The remainder of the seminar passed in focused practice. When it concluded with formal bows, Cohen felt physically tired, but mentally clarified. He had come seeking something. Not absolution, not recognition, but perhaps confirmation that his new path had validity. The brief interaction with Norris had provided this without fanfare or drama, a simple human connection built on shared understanding rather than competitive comparison. As the attendees dispersed, many lingered to speak with Norris or take photos. Cohen made no move to join them. His experience with the legend had already been more significant than any casual interaction could match. Instead, he began gathering his modest belongings, preparing to depart with Leon. They were nearly at the door when one of the event organizers approached a young woman whose movement quality suggested extensive training despite her unassuming demeanor. "Mr. Cohen?" Her voice was respectful but confident. "Sensei Tanaka would like to speak with you, if you have a moment." Surprised, Cohen glanced at Leon, who nodded encouragement. They followed the woman to a small side room where the elderly Japanese master waited, seated on a cushion before a low table. Beside him, unexpectedly, sat Chuck Norris. The room was simple yet refined, tatami mats covering the floor. A single calligraphy scroll hanging in the tokonoma alcove. A small arrangement of early spring flowers, providing the only decoration. The space felt deliberately separated from the modern world outside. A pocket of tradition maintained through conscious choice, rather than mere habit. "Please." Tanaka gestured to cushions across the table. "Join us for tea." Cohen and Leon seated themselves, the former acutely aware of the honor being extended. Tanaka performed a simplified tea ceremony, his movements deliberate despite his age. When each had been served, he spoke in lightly accented English. "Chuck-san has told me of your first meeting," he said, eyes twinkling with gentle humor that contained no mockery. "A most unorthodox introduction to principles." Cohen flushed slightly but met the old master's gaze. "I needed the lesson." "All who walk the path need lessons," Tanaka replied, lifting his teacup with hands marked by decades of training. "The wise student recognizes them, whatever form they take." The conversation that followed transcended Cohen's expectations. Rather than dwelling on the past, Tanaka and Norris spoke of martial arts as a living tradition, as a way of navigating life itself. They shared stories from their own journeys, mistakes made, lessons learned, insights gained through decades of practice. There was no pretense of perfection, only the authentic sharing of experience by those further along the path. Cohen listened intently, offering his own thoughts when asked, but primarily absorbing the wisdom being shared. This, he realized, was the true transmission, not techniques alone, but perspective, approach, understanding passed from one generation to the next through direct human connection. Sunlight shifted through the room's paper windows as afternoon progressed, creating patterns that moved slowly across the tatami. Time seemed to expand in this space, free from the urgent pace that characterized much of modern life. When Cohen spoke of his struggle to integrate his competitive background with traditional principles, both masters listened with genuine attention, neither dismissing his experience nor idealizing their own. As the tea ceremony concluded, Tanaka fixed Cohen with a clear, penetrating gaze. "Young man, you stand at an important crossroads. You have experienced both victory and defeat, both pride and humility. Now you must choose what to build from these experiences." "I'm trying to find my way," Cohen admitted, the honesty of this simple statement representing profound growth from the certainty that had once defined him. Tanaka nodded, approval evident in his expression. "The way is not found, but made step by step, day by day, choice by choice." He glanced at Norris, then back to Cohen. "Sometimes we need a mirror to see ourselves clearly. You have been given such a mirror. Use it wisely." The meeting concluded with formal bows. As they prepared to depart, Norris approached Cohen one last time. "Your trainer is skilled," he said, nodding toward Leon. "Listen to him." "I'm learning to," Cohen replied honestly. Norris extended his hand not as a perfunctory gesture, but as a genuine acknowledgement between practitioners. "The path is long. Walk it with integrity." Cohen accepted the handshake, feeling the calluses earned through decades of disciplined practice. "Thank you," he said simply, the words encompassing both their past encounter and this present moment of connection. Outside the cultural center, Budapest continued its daily rhythms. Tourists, photographing architectural landmarks, locals hurrying to appointments, the eternal flow of the Danube marking time's passage. As Cohen and Leon walked together toward the nearest metro station, a comfortable silence settled between them. Finally, Cohen spoke. "I understand now what you tried to tell me for years." Leon glanced at his student. "Which part?" "That fighting is the smallest aspect of martial arts. It's like mistaking a single wave for the entire ocean." The trainer nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. "So, what comes next for you?" Cohen looked up at the clear spring sky, considering the question. 6 months ago, his answer would have been immediate and centered on championships, recognition, dominance. Now, his perspective had fundamentally shifted. "Learning," he said finally. "More learning." As they descended into the metro station, Cohen felt a sense of alignment he had never experienced in his previous life of external achievement. The path ahead was neither easy nor simple, but for perhaps the first time, it was authentic. What had begun as humiliation had transformed into something approaching grace, not through denial of the past, but through its integration into a more expansive understanding of strength, of purpose, of what it meant to embody discipline rather than merely display it. In his hotel across the city, Chuck Norris sat with David Chen, reviewing footage from their documentary project. On screen, an 80-year-old karate master in rural Poland demonstrated kata that had been preserved through Soviet occupation, through war, through generations of political upheaval. "That's the story worth telling," Norris observed, indicating the footage with a gesture of profound respect. "Not the flashy moments that go viral, but the quiet persistence that preserves wisdom through dark times." David nodded, then hesitated before asking, What did you think of Cohen today? 1. Not the flashy moments. That Cohen, Norris considered the question. I think he's beginning to understand that martial arts isn't about defeating others, but about conquering yourself. A faint smile touched his lips. The hardest opponent we ever face is the one in the mirror. Outside, Budapest prepared for evening. Lights beginning to illuminate the historic bridges spanning the Danube. Within the flow of the city's life, different paths had momentarily intersected, creating ripples that would continue long after their convergence. In the end, that was the deepest truth of martial arts, not the spectacular moment of combat that draws attention, but the lasting transmission of principles that transcends it. Not the defeat of an opponent, but the ongoing victory over one's own limitations. Not the technique executed perfectly once, but the character forged through countless imperfect attempts. As night settled over the city, these understandings continued to unfold in a legend who had never stopped being a student, in a former fighter learning to become a martial artist, in a lineage stretching back through centuries of human struggle and transcendence. The true fight, as always, continued within. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.